1,000,000, Benedict Cross announced, his voice slicing through the crisp autumn air like a blade. That's what I'll pay anyone in this godforsaken place who can get that mutt to sit still beside them for 5 minutes. The crowd that had gathered at the Hollow Creek livestock auction shifted uncomfortably. Ranchers, breeders, and curious townsfolk, all drawn here by the rumors swirling around the German shepherd confined to the rusted kennel at the edge of the arena, turned their eyes from the snarling dog to the man in the tailored jacket. Benedict's smile didn't reach his eyes. He didn't need it to. His confidence, much like his wealth, never required approval. Ghost, the dog in question, didn't stop his low growl. Muscles taut beneath a coat matted with mud and old scars, the shepherd pressed against the steel mesh as if daring someone to try their luck. His teeth flashed with every bark, his eyes flickering with something older than fear, something closer to betrayal. Cross chuckled as the auctioneer hesitated. "Go on," he said, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "Bring out your prize. Let's see how far loyalty gets you without a leash or a stake." The handlers, 2 seasoned ranch hands who had wrestled bulls twice their size, looked uneasy as they opened the kennel gate with long poles and thick gloves. Ghost lunged forward, stopped only by the looped rope tied to a reinforced post buried deep in the gravel. Dust kicked up around him, but no one stepped closer, not the cowboys, not the handlers, not even the so-called trainers scattered in the stands who'd come hoping to catch Cross's eye and land a contract. In the midst of it all, unnoticed by most, a 12-year-old girl clutched a worn harmonica in her pocket. Willow Hayes had no business being in the center of a livestock auction, and she knew it. Her grandmother Miriam had only brought her because she couldn't leave her home alone after school, and even then the old woman had grumbled about the crowd, the noise, and the showboating. But the moment Willow had laid eyes on the German shepherd, she hadn't been able to look away. That dog, snarling and pacing like a wild animal, reminded her of something she couldn't quite name. Not fear exactly, not even anger. It was something deeper. Something hollowed out and buried, the way grief settled in bones after months of pretending it had passed. "You hear that, girl?" someone laughed. $1,000,000 just to sit next to that hellhound. You could retire before you hit high school. Willow didn't answer. She had already stepped forward, her sneakers silent on the dusty ground. The murmurs in the crowd grew sharper. Miriam called after her, but the girl didn't look back. Cross raised an eyebrow as she approached. "What's this? A child volunteer? I expected at least a grown man to embarrass himself first." Willow said nothing. She didn't need to. She pulled the harmonica from her pocket, the metal edges dulled with age, the initials EH still etched faintly along one side. Her mother's initials, the only thing she'd had left after the accident, after the fire, after everything that used to be home became just memory. She brought the harmonica to her lips and began to play. Not a song so much as a sound, a string of notes that barely floated above the wind, too soft to carry but impossible to ignore. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was familiar. It was safe. Ghost froze. The transformation was not immediate, but unmistakable. The dog who had lunged at anything within reach for days now stood rigid, ears pricked forward. The low growl in his chest faded. The rope slackened slightly as he stepped once, then again, toward the girl. Willow didn't flinch. She just kept playing. The crowd held its breath. Ghost sat. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't submission. It was something quieter, something rarer, trust. And though only 5 minutes were needed to claim the prize, no one moved to check a watch. Not even Benedict Cross, whose smug expression had drained into something colder, unreadable. 5 minutes passed. Stillness remained. No one applauded. No one cheered. The air had grown too heavy for noise. Even the auctioneer, who had spent his career whipping crowds into frenzies, couldn't speak. Ghost sat beside Willow as if they had arrived together, as if they belonged together. Her fingers tightened around the harmonica. The notes had stopped, but the silence they left behind was louder than anything that had come before. Cross turned without a word and walked away. Willow stood, brushing the dust from her jeans, and reached down. Ghost didn't resist when she touched his collar. He rose and followed her, not as a dog trained or conquered, but as one who had chosen his human. Miriam was waiting at the gate, eyes wide and wet with disbelief. "We're taking him home," Willow said simply, though the weight in her voice carried far more than words. "He doesn't belong here." And so they did. As the auction faded behind them, the girl, her grandmother, and the dog that no one could tame disappeared down the gravel road toward a weathered ranch on the edge of Sage Valley. The wind carried the last notes of the harmonica through the still air, a promise of something just beginning. Something no one, not even Benedict Cross, could have foreseen. "He doesn't walk, he glides." That was what Willow told her grandmother the morning after they brought him home. She'd been standing at the kitchen window for nearly an hour, her bare feet pressed against the cool linoleum, breath fogging the glass as the first soft light of dawn turned the frost-laced pasture into something silver and still. The dog, no longer the beast from the auction ring, not exactly, moved along the fence line like vapor. Every step calculated, every turn fluid, as if the earth made way for him rather than the other way around. When she spoke, Miriam didn't reply. She simply joined her at the window and watched the creature pace, with eyes narrowed and quiet understanding creasing the corners of her mouth. It was Willow who gave him the name. "Ghost," she said softly that afternoon, crouched beside the tangled thicket at the back of the property where he liked to linger, half visible in the shadows. "Because you move like one, and your eyes look through people like they're already gone." He didn't react to the name at first. But he didn't reject it either. He simply paused in his pacing, turned his head slowly toward her, and blinked with those pale, unreadable eyes, an expressionless acknowledgement that said more than any bark or wag ever could. Bringing him home hadn't changed him. Ghost didn't trust the world just because it was quieter here. He refused to enter the house, refused food from bowls, flinched at every metallic sound. A slammed door could send him into a crouch so low he nearly disappeared into the grass. And if anyone reached for a leash, any kind of strap, really, his entire body locked into a trembling stillness. The kind that came just before an explosion. But the explosion never came. Not with Willow. He never snapped at her. Never growled. He simply watched her, followed her from a distance. And more often than not ended up resting near her at day's end. As if proximity alone was enough to say he was trying. Miriam didn't interfere. She gave the girl space, stepping in only when necessary. When feet had to be ordered or fences mended. But otherwise, she let Willow figure it out on her own. The same way she'd once watched Emma pour herself into understanding horses no one else could touch. There was something familiar about the girl's stillness. The way she crouched in silence beside the broken thing. Without demanding anything of it. It was Clara Monroe who gave it a name. Not the dog, he already had one. But the thing that clung to him like frost in the spring. Clara, the local vet, was nearing 70. And didn't seem in any rush to let time tell her what to do. She arrived that first week in her dust-covered pickup. Her weathered hands resting gently on her knees. As she eased herself down onto the porch steps. She didn't reach for Ghost. Didn't even look at him for a long time. Just sipped weak tea and spoke to Miriam about winterizing the barn. About the hay shortage up north. About the way people forget animals remember things. Long after they stop bleeding. On her second visit, she brought liver treats. And left them in a line near the gate. Turning her back and humming quietly to herself. On the third, she sat within 10 feet of him. While she read aloud from an old veterinary manual. Her voice steady, the pages rustling like dry leaves in autumn. By the fourth visit, Ghost let her press a hand to his side. Long enough for her to feel the scarred tissue beneath his ribs. "This isn't just trauma," she said the day after Ghost had wandered off. Her voice was soft, but there was no mistaking the weight behind it. "It's conditioning. Layered. Deliberate. Someone trained him with fear and used it until fear was all that stuck." She didn't say who. Didn't need to. That night, Willow opened her mother's journals for the first time in months. The pages smelled of old paper and eucalyptus. The scent Emma used to keep on her hands from the oils. She rubbed on skittish animals. The handwriting looped and curled with urgency. Filled with notes from workshops. Ideas for new approaches. Moments of hope in the middle of failure. Force doesn't create obedience. One page read. It creates silence. And silence isn't the same as understanding. Willow traced the ink with her thumb. And glanced out the window. Toward the silhouette of Ghost. Lying beneath the cottonwood tree. The shape of him in the dark was both foreign and familiar, like a story she'd once been told but couldn't quite remember. Across town, inside the study of a modern lodge with floor-to-ceiling glass and leather chairs no one ever sat in, Benedict Cross leaned back and re-watched the footage from the auction. His face, lit by the flicker of the paused video, betrayed nothing. Not when Ghost sat beside the girl. Not when the crowd surged with gasps. Not even when his own voice was drowned out by applause. "She made me look like a fool," he muttered. The glass in his hand catching the amber gleam of whiskey. "So let's show them what real control looks like." The man at his side, his assistant, though the term never seemed accurate, nodded stiffly. "The fair." Benedict turned off the screen and stood. "Schedule the demonstration for the final day. I want every rancher in the state watching when my dogs remind them what authority looks like." Back at the Hayes Ranch, Willow was not preparing for any audience. She had no interest in headlines or gossip. She rose early, tended chores, and spent her afternoons with Ghost, who still refused every command and responded only to patience. She read aloud from Emma's notes in the afternoons, letting her mother's words drift through the open air. As she sat beneath the tree where Ghost rested. He didn't always look at her. But he never left when she read. Sometimes, when she paused to turn a page, she'd find him a few inches closer. Her harmonica, kept in the pocket of her coat, stayed mostly untouched. It wasn't time yet. She understood that now. Ghost didn't need music. He needed space. And so she gave it. Dr. Monroe continued to visit weekly, charting progress in whispers and raised brows. Always careful not to call anything a breakthrough too soon. Miriam watched from the kitchen, brewing endless tea, pretending not to listen. Willow never asked how long it would take. She already knew. There were no shortcuts with animals like this. No fixed timelines for rebuilding what others had torn down. And if anyone had asked her why she kept trying, she might have answered with the words from her mother's journal, words she now carried like a compass more than a memory. Trust begins in the quiet. Before the touch. Before the praise. In that moment when a creature decides to stay, even though it has every reason to run. No one had expected her to go first. At least, not the crowd gathered beneath the striped canvas canopy of the Sage Valley Autumn Fair's main arena. Ranchers. Breeders. Students. Weekend wanderers. They filled every seat, their chatter echoing off the metal bleachers, their hot drinks steaming in the crisp afternoon air. Kids dangled their legs over rails while older men leaned forward with skeptical eyes, arms crossed like they'd already made up their minds. In the center of the dirt-packed ring, under the glare of mounted floodlights and the slow whirl of banners overhead, Willow Hayes stepped into view. Not with a lead rope or flashy vest. Not with a treat bag or a clicker. But with her hands in her jacket pockets and her harmonica tucked inside. Ghost walked beside her. Not behind. Not tethered. Not dragged. The German shepherd's head remained low and watchful, his movement fluid and self-directed. The crowd's murmurs rose in volume as he paused mid-ranging and sat on his own accord. No one spoke into a microphone. There was no music. No commands shouted over loudspeakers. Just the wind rustling through the autumn leaves on the sycamores lining the fairground fence. She didn't tell Ghost what to do. She didn't need to. When she began to move, slow and deliberate, Ghost followed. His gaze tracked her steps, his body coiled with intent but never tense. When she stopped, he stopped. When she crouched, he sat. And when she raised her hand, not in instruction but in invitation, he mirrored her. Front paws forward, chin dipping low in what looked for all the world like a bow. Someone in the crowd gasped. Another laughed in disbelief. But most remained silent, struck dumb by what they were seeing. The same dog who had once snarled behind steel bars at the county auction now responded not to domination or fear, but to something else entirely. Something quiet and steady and invisible to the naked eye. Willow pulled the harmonica from her pocket like it was nothing at all. She didn't announce herself. She didn't wait for permission. She simply lifted it to her lips and began to play. The melody wasn't a song anyone recognized. It was slow, drifting, more breath than note, a lullaby of sorts. And Ghost, standing alone in the ring now, lifted his head and listened. His ears pricked forward. His tail remained still. His eyes found hers across the open air. And then, as if he understood what the music meant, he lay down in the dirt without a word and rested his head on his paws. The applause started softly, hesitant, as if people were afraid they might shatter something fragile. Then it surged, breaking across the arena like a wave. Cameras clicked. Someone whistled. A boy near the railing shouted Ghost's name, though he had no way of knowing it. Willow gave a quiet nod and began to turn toward the gate. But a voice crackled over the loudspeaker before she could take a full step. Well, wasn't that touching? The announcer's sarcasm poorly masked by static. Let's now welcome a demonstration from our headline sponsor, Mr. Benedict Cross himself. The name landed in the arena like a thunderclap. Out strode the billionaire, broad-shouldered in a pressed black coat, silver tie glinting under the lights. At his side, barely restrained by two handlers, was another German shepherd, this one broader across the chest, darker in coloring, with patches of fur missing near its hind legs and a thick rope harness across its shoulders. It barked, sharply, gutturally, teeth flashing as it lunged toward the ring. A real challenge, Benedict called, microphone in hand now, his smile too wide and too sharp. This dog has been declared untrainable by 4 separate facilities. But we believe in results. No sentimental nonsense. No songs. Just technique and control. He waved to his team, who entered with batons, noise clickers, and shock collar remotes strapped to their belts. The dog thrashed as they approached. Its eyes wild, foam building at the corners of its mouth. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Children were pulled back by anxious parents. Murmurs turned into protests just beneath the surface. And then, Ghost moved. Not fast. Not panicked. Not on command. He rose from where he'd been lying, stood still for a moment, and then walked, calmly, without tension, across the ring and toward the handlers. Willow's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't called him. She hadn't moved. But Ghost, ears forward, tail low, threaded his way across the dirt like mist, stopping just short of the frenzied dog, who froze in place, uncertain. Benedict shouted something, but it was lost beneath the rising pitch of crowd noise. His handlers held firm, unsure whether to interfere. Ghost sat down, deliberately lowering his body to the ground in front of the other dog, offering no challenge, no demand, just his presence, steady and unmoving. The other dog, panting and wide-eyed, tilted its head. It barked once, sharply, then stepped back, muscles twitching. Ghost didn't flinch. Instead, he lay down, fully, paws stretched in front of him, tail still. The wild dog, confused, still trembling, mirrored him, slowly lowering itself into a weary crouch just inches away. Willow moved then, not to Ghost, but to the edge of the ring, where the harmonica waited in her jacket pocket. She pulled it out, lifted it to her lips, and played that same gentle melody. No fanfare. No drama. Just breath through metal. The dog beside Ghost lifted its head toward her and didn't move. Not a growl. Not a snap. Just silence. The crowd erupted. Applause roared through the bleachers like a storm. Reporters scrambled to capture footage, pushing forward with microphones and cameras. Benedict's face drained of color. He gestured wildly to his handlers, but they stood frozen, unsure of how to respond to what had just unfolded. Two dogs, one broken by men, one healed by a girl, now lying side by side in the center of an arena, unmoved by the noise, untouched by the chaos. Calm. Present. Listening. Sheriff Dwyer stepped forward from the VIP box, arms crossed, his expression unreadable as he watched Benedict retreat from the ring, jaw clenched, microphone swinging uselessly at his side. Willow didn't address the crowd. She didn't bow. She didn't smile for the cameras. She simply walked into the center of the ring, knelt beside Ghost, and laid a hand gently on his back. The other dog looked at her, then slowly, cautiously moved forward to press its head against her knee. And though the cameras rolled, and the headlines began writing themselves before the first sentence could even be typed, Willow only saw one thing in that moment. The truth. A truth that no one could deny now, not even Benedict Cross. It began as a whisper, first in town, then beyond. By the following morning, footage of Willow Hayes and the two shepherds had already surged through regional broadcasts, migrating to national segments with headlines like "The Girl Who Listened" and "No Commands, Just Connection." The clip of Ghost lying beside the so-called dangerous dog had been reposted thousands of times before noon, the harmonica melody looping in the background like a lullaby for the disbelieving. In the school hallway, Willow felt the ripple of attention. Students who had never so much as looked at her locker now lingered nearby, eyes wide with something between awe and curiosity. But she moved through the noise as she always had, quiet, steady, unaffected. Back at the ranch, the real change had begun. Miriam Hayes, more seasoned than impressed, stood at the edge of their fenced paddock with a thermos of lukewarm coffee, watching the two shepherds, Ghost and the newcomer, now dubbed Bramble, move together through the tall grass. Their movements were not choreographed but mirrored the way birds fly in formation or leaves dance in tandem across a stream. What Willow had unlocked in Ghost had begun to echo in Bramble, though the trauma in him ran deeper, coiled tight and brittle just beneath the skin. Dr. Clara Monroe arrived just after lunch, her weathered pickup rattling up the gravel path in its usual rhythm. The vet stepped down stiffly, her knees protesting with every mile logged in service of animals no one else knew how to reach. In one hand she carried her leather medical kit, worn soft with use, in the other, a small parcel wrapped in cloth and bound with string. "I brought more than vaccines today," she said, her voice low as she joined Miriam at the fence. "The university's been calling behavioral specialists, equine psychologists, even a few handlers from search and rescue units. Seems they want to know how your granddaughter tamed a monster in under 5 minutes." Miriam took a slow sip of coffee. "She didn't tame him," she murmured. "She listened, that's all. And he heard her." Inside the barn, Willow sat on a hay bale with her mother's journal open in her lap. The pages, frayed and dotted with water stains, held diagrams and passages marked with tiny symbols, her mother's handwriting slanted in sharp in its certainty. Each note was more than instruction. It was philosophy. A reminder that trust was not earned through obedience, but through offering safety when no one else would. She had read the same entry 3 times when a knock at the barn door stirred her thoughts. Dr. Monroe appeared in the doorway, face shadowed by the light behind her. "May I come in?" she asked, although she had never waited for permission before. Willow nodded, pushing the journal aside. Clara entered slowly, setting the cloth-wrapped bundle down beside Willow. "I think it's time you saw this," she said. "It belonged to your mother. Kept it after the accident. Thought maybe one day." Willow untied the string with careful fingers, unfolding the fabric to reveal a second harmonica, this one older, its surface dulled by years of use, initials carved faintly into the side, E.H. The name Eliza Hayes still echoing like a forgotten song in the rafters of the barn. "She carried that one through college," Clara said. "Said the dogs listened better to music than to shouting. Said it reminded them of something older than fear." Willow didn't answer. She held the harmonica in both hands the way someone might hold a feather from a bird they'd never seen but always believed existed. Outside, the wind shifted. And with it, Ghost lifted his head. Elsewhere, the response to Benedict Cross's public humiliation had taken on a sharper edge. Though the billionaire had retreated without a word following the disaster at the fair, his network remained active. Cross began circulating footage of the failed demonstration. Conveniently edited to remove the moment when Ghost had diffused the chaos. In its place were clips of the dog's early aggression, pieced together into a montage suggesting instability rather than redemption. Miriam found the first article online late that night. A headline claiming untrained dog poses public safety risk accompanied by a blurry still of Bramble mid-lunge. She didn't need to ask where it came from. The fingerprints of Cross's media machine were always the same: polished, aggressive, and fundamentally dishonest. They gathered that evening in the kitchen. Willow, Miriam, and Clara, papers and devices spread across the scarred wooden table as the wind howled just outside the windows. Ghost lay at the hearth, chin on his paws, unmoved by the storm. "He's trying to discredit her," Clara said, tapping his screen. "If he spins the story fast enough, people won't remember what really happened." "He's scared," Miriam replied, stirring her tea. "That girl did more in minutes with no equipment than his men could in years." Willow sat silent, watching the shadows flicker across the walls. When she finally spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Then we show them again." Neither woman questioned the decision. They understood what had happened in that arena wasn't a trick or an anomaly. It was a beginning. The days that followed brought more than news cameras. Horse trailers rolled up the lane bearing dogs with histories as fractured as brambles. Border collies deemed too reactive, cattle dogs whose instincts had been punished rather than trained. Shepherds surrendered by handlers who confused discipline with cruelty. Some came with trembling limbs, others with defiant stares. But none with trust. And yet, each day, Ghost moved among them like a quiet sentinel, offering no promises except the comfort of his presence. By the end of the week, even the reporters grew quieter in their interviews. No one understood what they were witnessing, not fully. But they saw the change. And change, once seen, could not be unseen. Word reached Sage Valley's mayor, and eventually, the state capitol. Offers poured in: research partnerships, sponsorships, commercial endorsements. But Willow refused them all. Her mother's words remained the compass. Do no harm. Be the place they run to, not from. It was Bramble who gave them their next message. He had spent days watching from a distance, never far from Ghost. But never fully engaged. He would retreat at sudden movement, flinch at loud voices, tense at the rustle of fabric. Willow never reached for him. Never called. She simply waited. That Saturday, as the sun dipped low behind the ridge and the paddock burned gold, he crossed the distance. No fanfare, no dramatics. He walked to where Willow sat reading and lay beside her. One paw stretched out, his side brushing hers. Ghost joined them moments later, settling quietly nearby. And in that stillness, no commands, no crowd, no music. Something passed between the three of them. A kind of agreement. Not submission. Not hierarchy. Trust. Not all stories need to be told in words. The snow had melted into soil weeks ago. And in its place, the hills of Sage Valley rolled green and full beneath a cloudless April sky. Wild mustard bloomed along the fence lines. And the creek that carved through the lower pasture whispered with the clear voice of meltwater. Above it all, on the highest ridge, the Hayes Kinship Canine Sanctuary stood complete. Its beams sanded smooth by volunteers' hands. Its stones laid by neighbors who once doubted, but now believed. Not in magic or spectacle. But in something quieter. Something truer. What had begun with a girl, a dog, and a song had become something far larger. Not a monument. But a promise kept. The main building of the sanctuary bore no grand signage. Just a small carved plaque by the entrance. In honor of Emma Hayes. She listened first. Below it, in smaller script. And to those who still carry her voice. Around it, the sanctuary unfolded like a memory restored. Indoor and outdoor training rings. Soft-floored kennels designed not for containment but for calm. A modest library filled with journals and research. Much of it written in Emma's own hand. Willow moved through it each morning. Not as a child trying to live up to someone else's dream. But as someone who had grown into her own. She walked with calm steps. Eyes open to small signs. Subtle shifts in posture. Tremors beneath fur. The stilled breath of an animal waiting to know if it would be heard again. She no longer needed to consult the pages. Her mother's words lived in her now. And they had become her own. Ghost remained her shadow. Though not in the fearful way he had once clung to her side. He had learned to move with ease across the compound. His gait confident. His presence steady. He had become the sanctuary's quiet cornerstone. Not a mascot, not a pet. But a teacher. When new arrivals came. Dogs whose ears flattened at every sudden sound. Whose eyes never stopped scanning for escape. Ghost would meet them first. Never with dominance. Never with demand. Just a slow approach. A steady gaze. And a silent message they somehow understood. You're safe here. And they were. Dr. Clara Monroe had taken to visiting every Tuesday. Often bringing students from the veterinary academy. Who were still learning that healing meant more than needles and surgery. They sat cross-legged in the grass while Willow spoke. Never from a stage. Never elevated. But seated among the dogs. One hand usually resting on Ghost's back. As she explained things in terms they rarely heard in classrooms. She spoke of patience. Of trauma stored in muscle and breath. She demonstrated how touch could be permission instead of possession. She told stories. Not from textbooks but from memory. Of Bramble's first tail wag. Of the old bloodhound who had taken a week to eat from her hand. Of Ghost's first night sleeping without waking in panic. And they listened. Because she did. Caleb Cross returned on a Thursday in early May. His black SUV rolling up the gravel path slower than before. The dust behind him less a storm than a sigh. He stepped out wearing none of the arrogance his father had once carried like a badge. And for a long moment, he stood with a manila envelope in hand. Unsure of whether to knock or simply leave it at the gate. Willow met him halfway down the lane. Ghost flanking her as he always did. She didn't speak. Neither did the dog. But Caleb nodded. As though he had heard something all the same. He handed over the envelope with care. The edges already softened from being opened and read again and again. It's from him, Caleb said, not meeting her eyes. He wrote it before the stroke got worse. Said it had to be given in person. She opened the envelope later. Alone in the quiet of the barn loft. Where her mother once sat during storms. The letter was written in a trembling hand. The ink uneven. But the words clear enough. Willow, it began. By the time you read this, you will have done more than I ever imagined or ever allowed myself to believe was possible. You see, I knew your mother was right long before I admitted it. But I built too much of myself on being the man who knew better. He confessed in those pages not only his mistakes, but the fears that drove them. The fear of losing control. Of being irrelevant. Of change. Emma saw animals the way most people never bothered to see each other. The letter read. And now I see it too, because of you. Tell your grandmother I'm sorry. Tell Dr. Monroe she was right to walk away when she did. But most of all, tell Ghost, thank you. He had signed it simply. Benedict Cross. The envelope contained something else. A deed, marked and notarized. Transferring ownership of the neighboring tract of land to the sanctuary. An expanse of untouched meadow. That rolled into the edge of the ridge. Perfect for expansion. Or simply for freedom. Willow read the letter again. Folded it with care. And placed it in the drawer beneath the harmonica. That night. As the sky turned a deep amber behind the silhouette of the ridge. She stood at the fence line. Ghost beside her. Watching the wind move through the tall grasses of the new parcel. A group of younger dogs played at the far edge. Their joy unburdened. Their bodies no longer flinching from invisible ghosts. Behind her, the sanctuary lights began to glow. In the soft hush of dusk, she could hear Miriam's voice from the porch, calling in the last batch of volunteers for supper. Somewhere in the kennel yard, Bramble let out a sleepy huff and turned in his bedding. There was peace in the air. Not perfection. Not the absence of pain. But the quiet, enduring presence of safety. Willow placed a hand in her pocket, fingers brushing the old harmonica, its metal worn smooth by years of touch. She hadn't played it publicly since the fair, though Ghost still stirred when he heard its song. Tonight, she lifted it gently to her lips, the notes rising not in performance, but in remembrance. Of a mother's vision. Of a dog's second chance. Of a community transformed not by spectacle, but by one girl's refusal to stop listening. When she lowered the harmonica, Ghost pressed his shoulder into her leg, eyes trained not on her, but on the horizon, where the golden light spilled across the hills like a promise. She knelt beside him, voice low, steady, ready, certain. "I never made you change," she whispered, one hand resting on his fur. "I just waited long enough to hear what you needed." In the distance, the young dogs barked, chasing butterflies and sunlight across the grass. And the center that listened stood behind them. Quiet. Open.